I'll create a complete 4,000-word story following all your requirements. I'll write in plain text without italics, special characters, or abbreviations, and I'll replace all titles with or as specified. I am a 32-year-old software engineer living in Seattle now, but my story begins in Portland, with a family that always made their priorities clear. Growing up, my younger brother Jason was the golden child, while I had to fight for every scrap of attention and support. Then came that life-changing ultimatum from my parents. Either you support your brother's future or you move out. I chose to leave, but what happened 10 years later still shocks me to this day. Before I continue with my story, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel if you have ever had to make a difficult choice that completely changed your life path. I grew up in what most people would call a typical middle-class household in Portland, Oregon. My father, Harold, worked as a bank manager, while my mother, Diana, taught third grade at a local elementary school. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood, not wealthy by any means, but comfortable enough. From the outside, we probably looked like the perfect American family, but inside our home, the reality was very different. My brother Jason is 5 years younger than me, and from the moment he was born, it was clear he held a special place in my parents' hearts that I never would. I still remember the day they brought him home from the hospital. I was excited to meet my new brother, but when I tried to peek at the baby, my mother pulled away, telling me my hands were too dirty to be near the baby. My father quickly ushered me away, saying I could see my brother later when I was cleaner and calmer. That moment set the tone for our family dynamic for years to come. As we grew up, the pattern of favoritism became impossible to ignore. When I turned 8, my birthday celebration consisted of a homemade cake and 2 friends coming over for a few hours. When Jason turned 8, my parents rented out a small amusement park, invited his entire class, and hired a professional photographer to document the event. They explained the difference by saying business had been better that year, but similar situations kept happening year after year. School events were another clear indicator. My parents never missed a single one of Jason's soccer games or school plays, even when my mother had to call in sick or my father had to reschedule important meetings. Meanwhile, when I won the state science competition in 10th grade, neither of them showed up because Jason had a cold, and they did not want to leave him with a babysitter. When I called to tell them about my victory, my father simply said, "That is nice, Ahmad. We knew you could do it," before asking to speak with Jason to make sure he had taken his medicine. Even our family vacations revolved around Jason. When I was interested in science museums and historical sites, my suggestions were vetoed because they would be too boring for Jason. Instead, we went to amusement parks and beaches because that is what Jason preferred. By the time I was a teenager, I had given up on suggesting destinations altogether. The most frustrating part was how differently they treated our academic achievements. Jason was considered brilliant for bringing home B's and C's, receiving lavish praise and rewards for what my parents called his creative mind that cannot be constrained by traditional grading systems. Meanwhile, my straight A's were met with simple nods and comments like, "Of course you did well. You always do well in school." There was never any recognition that my grades came from hours of hard work and dedication rather than some innate ability that required no effort. By 16, I realized if I wanted anything beyond the basics, I would have to get it myself. I started working part-time at a local grocery store, saving money for things my parents refused to buy me. While they purchased Jason a top-of-the-line computer for his future career in video game design, I worked extra hours to buy myself a second-hand laptop I needed for school projects. When they bought Jason expensive basketball shoes to encourage his athletic potential, I picked up weekend shifts to afford the calculator required for my advanced math class. Despite the lack of support, I was determined to attend college. I knew education was my ticket to independence and a better life. I studied relentlessly, staying up late after work shifts to maintain my grades and prepare for SAT exams. My hard work paid off with a partial scholarship to a state university, but it was nowhere near enough to cover all expenses. My parents made it clear they had not saved anything for my education. "College is not for everyone," my father told me when I brought up the subject. "Maybe you should consider learning a trade instead." I later discovered they had been putting money into a college fund for Jason since his birth, despite him showing little academic inclination. With no family support, I took on multiple jobs during my college years. I worked at the university library in the mornings, delivered food in the evenings, and took overnight shifts at a 24-hour convenience store on weekends. My housing situation was far from ideal, a tiny room in a rundown house shared with 5 other students, all of us cutting corners to afford tuition. My social life was practically non-existent. While other students were joining clubs, attending parties, and building networks that would help them later in their careers, I was either working, studying, or trying to catch a few hours of sleep before starting the cycle all over. Again, there were countless nights when I sat at my desk fighting exhaustion as I tried to complete assignments after an 8-hour shift, wondering if it was all worth it. But I refused to give up. Every time I felt like dropping out, I reminded myself that this struggle was temporary and the education would benefit me for life. I learned to function on minimal sleep, to budget every penny, and to find free resources whenever possible. The library became my second home, not just for studying, but also for the free heating in winter and air conditioning in summer luxuries my cheap housing lacked. When graduation day finally arrived, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride walking across that stage. I had graduated with honors in computer science, despite every obstacle. My roommates and work colleagues cheered from the audience, people who had witnessed my daily struggle and supported me in ways my family never had. My parents attended the ceremony but left early because Jason was bored. They did not even stay for the photos. After graduation, I returned to my parents' home temporarily. My plan was to save money for a few months while job hunting, then move into my own place once I had secure employment. It was not an ideal arrangement, but it seemed like the most practical option at the time. Looking back, I realize I was still hoping for some validation or recognition from my parents, some acknowledgement of what I had accomplished against all odds. I never got it. Jason had just graduated high school that summer with mediocre grades, but my parents threw him an extravagant party that cost more than what I had earned in 3 months of part-time work during my final semester. They invited extended family, neighbors, and all his friends to celebrate what my father called the first step in Jason's journey to greatness. During the party, I overheard relatives asking Jason about his college plans, and he casually mentioned that he was going to attend Brentwood University, one of the most expensive private institutions in the country. That was the first I had heard of it. No one had mentioned this plan to me, despite me living in the same house for the past month. I waited until after the guests left to ask my parents about it, wondering how they planned to afford such an expensive school, given our firmly middle-class lifestyle. That night, during what was supposed to be a normal family dinner, my life changed forever. My mother served my father's favorite pot roast, and as we sat down, she announced they had exciting news to share. With proud smiles, they revealed they had been saving for Jason's education since he was born and had accumulated enough for 2 years at Brentwood. For the remaining 2 years, they planned to take out a second mortgage on the house. I sat in silence, my fork suspended midway to my mouth, as the implications of what they were saying sank in. They had been saving for Jason all these years, while telling me they could not afford to help with my education. I had worked multiple jobs, lived in substandard housing, sacrificed my health and social life to put myself through college, all while they were setting aside money for my brother's future. What about my college fund? I finally asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it directly. My father had the decency to look uncomfortable for a moment, before explaining, Ahmad, we always knew you were the responsible one. You would find a way to make it work, and you did. Jason needs more support to succeed. Before I could respond to this painful confirmation of their favoritism, my mother added something that shocked me even further. Actually, we wanted to talk to you about Jason's tuition. Even with our savings and the second mortgage, we are still about $15,000 short per year. I looked between them, not understanding at first what this had to do with me. Then my father cleared his throat and said the words I will never forget. Either you support your brother's future by helping with his tuition, or you need to move out so we can rent your room to help cover the costs. I stared at them in disbelief. You want me to pay for Jason's education after I just finished putting myself through college with zero help from you? My mother reached across the table as if to take my hand, but I pulled away. We know you have a good degree now, Ahmad. You can get a well-paying job in that computer thing you studied. Jason needs this opportunity to find his path. The unfairness of it all struck me like a physical blow. What about my path? What about my dreams I wanted to save for a place of my own, to start building my career without the crushing weight of working multiple jobs just to survive. My father's expression hardened. Jason has real potential. He deserves the best start in life we can give him. And I did not. I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. That is not what I meant, he replied, but his eyes told a different story. I excused myself from the table, too overwhelmed to continue the conversation. I spent that night lying awake, staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, a room decorated with Jason's old posters, because my parents had converted it to a guest room the moment I left for college. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made, the exhaustion, the loneliness, the struggle, all without support from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. By morning, I had made my decision. I found my parents in the kitchen and told them simply, I am moving out, today. My mother's face fell. But Ahmad, where will you go? You do not even have a job yet. I will figure it out, I said, echoing the sentiment they had expressed throughout my life whenever I needed something they did not want to provide. I always do right. My father nodded stiffly. If that is your decision, it is not my decision, I clarified. It is yours. You made it last night when you made it clear where your priorities lie. My mother tried to guilt me one last time. I never thought you would be so selfish. This is about your brother's future. And what about mine, I asked, but I already knew they had no answer to that question. I spent the morning packing my belongings into the used car I had purchased during my junior year of college, a 10-year-old Honda that had been my only significant purchase. I did not have much to pack, just clothes, my laptop, and a few books. The furniture in the room belonged to the house, not to me. As I carried the last box out, Jason appeared in the hallway, clearly confused about what was happening. Are you leaving? He asked, looking genuinely upset. At 18, he was still largely unaware of the family dynamics that had shaped our relationship. In his world, I was just his big brother who sometimes seemed distant. I have to make my own way now, I told him, not wanting to taint his relationship with our parents despite everything. He was still young, and the favoritism was not his fault. He hugged me awkwardly, the only real goodbye I received that day. My parents watched from the kitchen doorway as I loaded my final possessions, offering no help and no warm words. As I drove away from the only home I had ever known, I felt both terrified and strangely liberated. I had no safety net, but I also had no more illusions about where I stood with my family. With only $3,000 in savings and no job lined up, I drove from Portland to Seattle, drawn by the city's growing tech scene and the possibility of finding work in my field. Those first few weeks were among the hardest of my life. I slept in my car, parked in different Walmart lots each night to avoid drawing attention. I showered at a gym where I purchased the cheapest possible membership, and I spent my days at the public library using their free computers to apply for jobs and their free Wi-Fi to check my emails. I applied for 47 positions in the first month, everything from entry-level programming jobs to basic IT support roles. I received 15 rejections, was ghosted by 20 companies, and managed to secure 12 interviews. I prepared for each interview at the library, watching tutorials on how to answer technical questions and practicing in whispers in the quiet study rooms. After a particularly grueling 4-hour interview that included a live coding challenge, I was offered an entry-level position at a small software company developing business applications. The salary was lower than the industry average, but it came with health insurance and the promise of a normal, stable life. I accepted immediately. With my first paycheck, I moved from my car into a shared apartment with 3 roommates. The room was barely big enough for a twin bed and a small desk, but it had a door that closed and a roof that did not leak. After 2 months of consistent employment, I upgraded to a slightly better shared apartment with just 1 roommate, a nursing student who was rarely home due to her clinical rotations. Each promotion and salary increase allowed for small improvements in my living situation. I was strategic about my career moves, changing companies twice in the first 3 years to increase my salary and expand my skill set. I specialized in security protocols for financial software, a niche but lucrative area that put me in high demand as data breaches became more common and companies grew increasingly concerned about protecting sensitive information. During this time, I maintained minimal contact with my family. My mother would occasionally text to ask how I was doing, but our exchanges rarely went beyond surface-level pleasantries. I never asked about Jason or his university experience, and she never volunteered the information. My father did not contact me at all for the first 2 years after I left. Through a mutual acquaintance, I learned that Jason had dropped out of Brentwood after just 2 years, deciding that university was stifling his creativity. By then, my parents had already remortgaged their house and spent their entire savings on his education money that had essentially been wasted. I felt no satisfaction in this news, only a dull ache for what could have been if they had distributed their support more equally between their children. As I approached my late 20s, my mother began calling occasionally, usually when she needed something. The first time she asked for $800 to fix their water heater, promising to pay me back when my father received his annual bonus. The money was never repaid, and similar requests followed, each with a different excuse and the same unfulfilled promise of repayment. Meanwhile, I continued building my own success. I purchased a small house in a modest but safe neighborhood of Seattle. I founded a startup with 2 colleagues developing security software that was eventually acquired by a larger tech company, providing me with my first significant financial windfall. I invested wisely, building a portfolio that would secure my future regardless of market fluctuations. More importantly, I created a found family of close friends, colleagues, and mentors who provided the emotional support and validation I never received growing up. I had holiday dinners with my former boss, and his wife went hiking with a group of fellow tech enthusiasts every month, and mentored young programmers from disadvantaged backgrounds, helping them avoid some of the struggles I had faced. Then, almost exactly 10 years after I had driven away from my parents' house, I received a call from my mother. Her voice sounded different, subdued and trembling in a way I had never heard before. "Ahmad," she said, "I know we have not been the parents you deserved, but we need your help." She explained that my father had lost his job 2 years earlier and had been unable to find comparable work at his age. They had fallen behind on their mortgage payments, and the bank was foreclosing on the house. They had no retirement savings left, having spent everything on Jason's education and subsequent failed attempts at various career paths. They were effectively homeless. "We have nowhere to go," she admitted, the pride that had once characterized her voice completely absent. "We were wondering if we could stay with you until we get back on our feet. It would just be temporary." The irony of the situation was not lost on me. The parents who had once given me an ultimatum to support my brother or leave were now asking me for shelter. The people who had never supported my education or career were now hoping to benefit from the success I had built entirely on my own. I told her I would think about it and hung up. For the next 2 days, I wrestled with complex emotions. Part of me wanted to refuse to let them experience the same uncertainty and fear I had felt sleeping in my car all those years ago. Another part recognized that despite everything, they were still my parents, now elderly and vulnerable. The decision I made would reveal not just who they were, but who I had become. After careful consideration, I arranged to meet my parents at a diner halfway between Seattle and Portland. When they walked in, I barely recognized them. My father, once tall and imposing, now stooped and gray, looked at least a decade older than his actual age. My mother, who had always taken pride in her appearance, wore clothes that were visibly worn and faded. They slid into the booth across from me, their eyes downcast, as if unable to face me directly. "Thank you for meeting us," my father said, his voice lacking the authoritative tone I remembered. "We appreciate you taking the time." We ordered coffee, and as we waited for our drinks, my mother attempted small talk, asking about my work in a way she never had before. I answered briefly before steering the conversation to the matter at hand. "Tell me exactly what happened," I said. My father explained how his bank had downsized, eliminating his position despite his 30 years of service. At 58, he had found himself competing against younger, less expensive candidates for fewer positions. My mother had retired from teaching to help Jason with his latest venture, a food truck that had failed within 6 months. Between the second mortgage for Jason's education, the loans for his failed businesses, and the lack of income, they had depleted their savings and retirement accounts. "We have nothing left," my mother admitted, tears forming in her eyes. "The house will be sold at auction next month. Jason is living with his girlfriend's family, but they do not have space for us." My father, who I had never seen show vulnerability, cleared his throat several times before speaking. "Ahmed, I know we were not fair to you. We favored Jason, made you fight for everything on your own. I told myself it was because you were stronger, more capable. But the truth is, we failed you as parents. I am sorry. The apology, though years too late, hit me harder than I expected. I had long ago given up hope of ever hearing those words. Where is Jason now? I asked, curious about my brother's role in this situation. He is working at a restaurant, my mother explained, trying to save enough to get his own place. He feels terrible about everything. I considered my options carefully before responding. I am not comfortable with you moving in with me. I began watching their faces fall further, but I can help in a limited way. I offered to pay for a small apartment for 6 months, enough time for them to find jobs and start rebuilding. I made it clear this was not a gift, but a loan, with specific repayment terms once they were employed. I also established boundaries about our future relationship, explaining that while I was willing to help, I needed respect and acknowledgement of the past. I will not be your retirement plan, I stated firmly. I will help you get back on your feet, but you need to build your own safety net moving forward. They accepted my terms with a humility I had never witnessed from them before, thanking me repeatedly as if I had offered far more than I actually had. In the weeks that followed, I helped them move into a small but clean one-bedroom apartment in a suburb of Seattle. I connected my father with a friend who managed a hardware store, securing him a position that paid less than his banking job, but provided steady income. My mother found part-time work as a tutor, utilizing her teaching experience in a new context. Around this time, I also reconnected with Jason. The entitled teenager had grown into a more mature adult, sobered by his own failures and the consequences of our parents' favoritism. Over coffee, he apologized for never recognizing how differently we had been treated. I was so wrapped up in myself that I never saw what was happening, he admitted. I just accepted that everything revolved around me, because that is how it always had been. Seeing his genuine remorse, I offered to help him get IT training, recognizing that he had intelligence, but had never developed the discipline to apply it. He completed a 6-month certification program and secured an entry-level help desk position, the first stable job he had ever held. Over the next 2 years, our family relationships slowly rebuilt on new, healthier terms. My parents found their footing, with my father eventually being promoted to assistant manager and my mother expanding her tutoring business. They moved into a slightly larger apartment of their own and began to repay the loan as promised. More importantly, the power dynamic had permanently shifted. They no longer made demands, but asked respectfully for what they needed. They expressed genuine interest in my life and career, no longer treating my achievements as expected and unremarkable. The favoritism that had defined our family for decades gradually gave way to more balanced relationships. I learned that forgiveness does not require forgetting. I could acknowledge the pain of my past while still moving forward with my parents in my life. I established and maintained healthy boundaries, making it clear when behavior was unacceptable while remaining open to positive change. The greatest lesson from this 10-year journey was that self-worth cannot and should not be determined by family validation. The parents who once deemed me less deserving of support than my brother eventually came to respect the strength and success I built entirely on my own terms. Their approval, once desperately sought, became far less important than my own satisfaction with the life I had created. Adversity built resilience I never would have developed in a comfortable, supportive environment. Each struggle taught me self-reliance, determination, and the importance of creating my own support systems. The difficult path forced me to become stronger, more resourceful, and ultimately more successful than the easy road ever could have. Family relationships can heal, but they must be based on mutual respect. The unconditional love that should flow naturally from parent to child had to be earned in reverse in our case. My parents had to demonstrate that they deserved a place in my life before being welcomed back into it. That earned relationship, though more complicated, ultimately proved more meaningful than blind familial obligation. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have helped your parents after years of favoritism and neglect? Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who hurt you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to the channel for more real-life experiences. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that sometimes the family we create for ourselves is just as important as the one we are born into.